Good morning and welcome to a bit of a gloomy Thursday morning, but hopefully our third session of the BSI Global Built Environment Conference will be illuminating today, and we are covering the topic of construction product quality, asset quality and performance. You may well have joined the two previous sessions yesterday, and there's another one this afternoon. We'll cover a bit more about that in due course. Before we get into the first half of the session, I'll just cover the usual. I'm sure you're very familiar with the housekeeping rules by now, but just to reiterate that this is a listen-only webinar, but it is being recorded, so there will be an opportunity to watch the recording back after the event. We do welcome your questions. We have had some submitted before the event, but you're welcome to submit some more via the Q&A function that you'll see on the right hand side of your screen. After each of the sessions, we will hold a Q&A session at the end of the presentations that the speakers will give. Please simply click on that Q&A button if you wish to pose a question. If you do happen to have any technical difficulties, please do submit that issue via the Q&A function, and the technical team will do their best to help. Upon completion of the feedback survey that you will be sent, BSI will send you a link to that recording of the webinar in due course for you to share with anyone else and watch again yourselves. This is a CPD recognised webinar. Please request your certificate via the feedback survey following the webinar if you wish to have one. So in terms of our agenda, welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us in your busy weeks leading up to Christmas, no doubt. My name is Ian Richardson. I'm one of the sector leads in the built environment team at BSI. We had a session yesterday on sustainability that Claire Price delivered in the morning, and Dan Rossiter delivered the afternoon session on AI. This afternoon, Anne Bird finishes off with the health and safety and wellbeing webinar, so we will return back to that in the closing remarks. Shortly, David Hughes from the Department for Levelling Up will cover a presentation relating to construction products regulation and reform, after which David and I will speak about some of the questions we've had. We'll then take a short break to allow you to have some coffee and tea and a comfort break before moving into the second half with revision of ISO 41001 on facilities management. We'll do a Q&A with the speakers for closing remarks, and we will aim to finish around 11:30. So just before we speak to David, some thoughts from me just on where we're at the moment with the built environment sector. Clearly a lot of plate spinning going on with the amount that the industry has to deal with at the moment. I'm sure you're very familiar with this list of things that the industry has to try and get its head round. The Building Safety Act is now in place, and recommendations that came out of the Grenfell inquiry and the Morel Day report on testing for a safer future. Lots of recommendations in that for government, for the industry and for standards. So BSI is looking at how we can help support those recommendations that Paul Morel gave. As I said, we've already had a session on net zero and sustainability and how that is changing the landscape. David will speak about the regulatory reform aspect. Still, the recovery of the pandemic goes on, although hopefully recovery is going well now. And also fluctuating building material prices and availability of materials is still causing lots and lots of problems. Aging building stock, I'm sure you're well aware of things like concrete issue with RAC and how that has led to an analysis of the building stock that we have and how that can be looked at in the future. And of course, advances in technology and innovation and how we try and balance those, as Dan I'm sure would have talked about a lot in this session yesterday afternoon. For our technical committees, go on to the next slide, please. This is just one example of how BSI and its technical committees structures itself. This one in particular is for some of our construction products technical committees. So CB3 is the main construction products committee. There is another one under CB0, our strategic committee, which looks at the policy and regulation aspect for construction products, CB05. And you can see some of those construction products technical committees for lots and lots of different construction products listed underneath. And of course, when we get to the facilities management presentation with Nick and Stan, you will see that they have FMW1 as their technical committee and FMB1 as their strategic committee, and they will tell you more about how they structure themselves. But we have lots of technical committee members working with us on the standards development in these areas, and we try and bring together all of the industry challenges that were on the previous slide and how standards can hopefully be developed further in the future to help solve some of these. If we go on to the next slide, please. And the hope, of course, with BSI as the UK's national standards body is that we can produce standards with you as an industry as a solution. With those product standards, support regulation and legislation, moving into the assurance side of it, with products system testing, we help to support innovation. It's not just standards that have been around for decades, it is now moving into the more modern areas, as we touched on yesterday and this afternoon with our competency suite. And then also trying to work with you to develop the help and guidance that you need to not just understand the standards, but how they interlink with each other in a more holistic approach. And of course, networking with our committee members and collaborating together to try and produce standards that really make a difference. And instead of that balancing act we talked about, it's really much more easy for us to understand how we can use standards to solve some of these issues. And we like to talk to you as much as we can. So if there are standards you think need to be developed or there's gaps or any issues that you have, then please do reach out to us and we will always help to discuss those within our committees. So if you just move on to the next slide, please, and we will get into our first session with David Hughes, Head of Product Performance in the Construction Products Division at the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities. DLUC or DLUC, however we pronounce it. David, welcome to this morning's session. And just as a brief intro into David, David leads the product performance team at the Department for Levelling Up, responsible for developing and taking forward reform, including in relation to standards, testing, product marking, and the role of conformity assessment bodies. Also the relationship with UCAS and BSI and international considerations. Prior to this, David was head of office for the department's chief scientific advisor, leading the CSA's office and driving forward the CSA's objectives. Policy professional by background, David has worked in several government departments, including the Home Office and the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, leading on policy and legislation, including on gambling, planning system, and leading the construction products policy and legislation to prepare the UK for its departure from the EU, which I'm sure will come up a bit this morning as we touched on before. So David, welcome, thank you for joining us, and over to you for your slides.
Thanks very much, Ian, and good morning, everyone. Apologies that you, this may not be a reason to apologise, but you won't see my face appearing on screen because due to some IT challenges with government IT, I'm joining on my phone. But I do have a few slides which we will run through. So if we could just move on to this sort of introduction slide, please. So I thought, first of all, it would just be helpful to kind of recap why myself and the team I'm in are looking at taking forward reform of the construction products regulation, the regulatory regime, and also just to talk a bit more about some of the work that's been done to date in our broader area of work within the department. So, as you'll be aware, a lot of this work is driven following the Grenfell Tower fire, which was the deadliest fire in Britain since the start of the 20th century. Following that, we have taken forward a number of aspects of work. Some of those are summarised there. I won't sort of go through this word by word, but in particular, they're just on the penultimate bullet point. The government established the Grenfell inquiry, which, as you may well know, is still going on, and also several reviews, including one on building regulations and fire safety, which was led by Dame Judith Hackett. And then more recently, and particularly relevant to what I'll talk about today, was the review of construction products testing regime, which was led by Paul Morrell and Annalisa Day. Over the last couple of years, we've taken forward a number of foundation elements as part of the reforms following Grenfell, both in terms of the Fire Safety Act and the Building Safety Act 2022. The Building Safety Act, amongst other things, created a building safety regulator and the National Construction Products Regulator, which currently sits within the Office for Product Safety and Standards. That's just sort of some of the context as to why we have a larger team in place now looking at construction products reform. And so if we move on to the next slide, please. I mentioned the Building Safety Act, and so just to touch on a bit more detail about what that covers. So that gives new powers to the government to strengthen and extend the regulatory framework for construction products. That includes requirements around construction products to be safe through a general safety requirement. It gives us powers to create a list of safety critical construction products, which would be a sort of special category where there would be particular requirements attached to those due to the potential risk of serious harm if something were to go wrong. And the Building Safety Act also strengthens the market surveillance and enforcement regime, of which establishing the two regulators that I mentioned was a key part. So I should just take the opportunity to sort of clarify that when I talk about powers there, and in particular the bullet points around a general safety requirement and a list of safety critical products, what that means is that Parliament is agreeing in effect for there to be the ability to introduce those measures. But one moment, sorry, I will just be about 20 seconds, apologies. Hello, sorry, please accept my apologies. So as I was saying, the Building Safety Act gives powers to create a general safety duty requirement and create a list of safety critical products. That is not something which we have enacted, taken forward as yet, but it gives us the ability to do that through making further legislation to achieve that and deliver that aim. So I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. If we just move on to the next slide, please. So this next slide will talk a little bit more about what we are looking at in terms of our construction products reform. And in terms of what happens next, I'll come to that at the end of the session. Some of the principles that we are looking at as part of developing our proposals for construction products reform are set out here. And there are also a few kind of questions that I've included, which are things that we are thinking about, which I thought might be helpful to share with you today. So one of the things that we're keen to kind of look at is how to make sure that the regime is risk-based and brings safety and simplicity to the fore. So as many of you will know, we have a regime at the moment which was inherited from when we left the European Union, and for a few different reasons, it doesn't have safety as a principal focus, and also the it only has partial coverage, or provides partial coverage of the regulatory regime, and also which products are part of the regulatory regime or fall outside of it is not commensurate to the potential risk associated with those products. So those are some of the issues that we are looking at, thinking about how best to address as part of our reforms. We think that it's appropriate for manufacturers to ensure that their products are safe for their reasonably foreseeable use, and we'll set out more detail on sort of what we mean by that in due course. And then the sort of fourth bullet point onward, there are a few of the questions which we're thinking about as part of our reforms. So I'm just sort of sharing these primarily to illustrate some of the things that we're thinking about and the potential direction of travel as part of these reforms. So, for example, we think that manufacturers know their products better than anyone, and so one of the questions we're thinking about is, should it be manufacturers' responsibility for ensuring their products are safe for their intended use when being placed on the market? We also think that wider industry has an important role to play, and so, for example, in sort of raising overall standards across the industry, helping to ensure that products are used appropriately, and also thinking about the role of wider industry in contributing to the public good and how best we can do that. The national quality infrastructure, so that includes the BSI, the UK Accreditation Service, and also conformity assessment bodies. And so we are thinking about what the roles of those institutions should be going forward, and how they can help business and consumers to buy what they expect and contribute towards that public good that I mentioned. And then lastly, in terms of some of the sort of things we're thinking about, but there are many other questions as well, is in terms of the regulators. So that's the two I mentioned earlier, the National Regulator for Construction Products and the Building Safety Regulator. We're thinking about what powers are and duties are appropriate to enable them to act decisively where there are issues which need to be addressed. If we move on to the next slide, I've just talked about some of the things we're thinking about in terms of the sort of regulatory framework, but I do just want to touch on as well that we see industry leadership as key to the reforms that we want to see. And we see this very much as driven by industry. That's sort of how we want this to be taken forward, but within an overall framework that we'll develop in partnership with industry. And so some of the key players there we've set out in terms of economic operators having a responsibility to act ethically, thinking about how we can improve and build and enhance some of the professions, ensuring that institutions that are involved have sort of transparency throughout, and some openness of activities across the piece, and several other issues there. One of the points around the third party assurance, being trusted and operate for the public good. That's one of the things that was mentioned in Paul Morell and Annalisa Day's report, for example, which we've drawn on quite heavily in terms of thinking about our reforms. So then just lastly, in terms of sort of what next, so our intention is to set out our proposals for reform of the construction products regime in due course. Apologies that that's a rather full service term, but I can't be more specific at this point. But I do just want to say that we recognise that industry has been seeking certainty for quite some time now, really since the UK left the European Union. And so we are very keen to set out our proposals as soon as we can, and I'm hoping it won't be in the too distant future now. So the intention is subject to final decisions from ministers. The approach intention is that will be a document which sets out our thinking and invites views from all of those in the industry, communities, and more broadly. And we're very keen to then use the period following publication to undertake quite extensive engagement through a combination of sort of events where we will set out more information on our thinking and our rationale to be able to reach a sort of wide audience, and then also probably some more kind of focus sessions where we can really get under the detail of some of the things we're thinking about. Some more detail will follow on that soon, but we'll be very keen to work with the industry as we develop and take forward these reforms. So I think that's all for me for the moment, but we're happy to take any questions. And thank you to VSI for the opportunity to talk on this today. So if we just move to my final slide, that just invites any questions, and I think I hand back to Ian at this point.
Yes, thank you, David. Really appreciate you giving us a summary of the journey to this point and what is likely to happen from the department's point of view going forward. So yes, as you can imagine, there's quite a few questions that we've had, which we'll do our best to run through over the next few minutes. So, you know, the topic itself, as we can imagine, certainly after post-Grenfell, is quite an emotive one in some respects. And this first question, to some extent, is an illustration of that, and the themes that run with all the questions, especially around fire safety, certainly reinforce that. But the question, not my wording, by the way, David, the question is worded: our government has started to slide backwards again. As professionals in this industry, do you think we have an overriding duty of care for the people of the UK and our planet? Which I think resonates with a lot of what you put into your presentation, I guess.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I think there's probably two, right, sort of infer two aspects in terms of responding to that. I mean, I think in terms of the duty of care aspect, just to sort of re-emphasise that the overriding principal objective of the reforms that we're taking forward in terms of safety. So how can we make the regime safer and ensure safe use of products, etc. Through our reforms. We want to simplify the regime as well, but not at the cost of safety. So yeah, I can completely sort of agree the point made that safety has to be is essential to the reforms that we're taking forward. Just on the sort of on the planet point, I suppose I think that's referring to sort of recent announcement on net zero and climate change. So that sort of overall is led by a different government department, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero. But the government is committed to meeting net zero by 2050. That remains a legal requirement. I can only really talk about construction products, but we see a net zero and climate change mitigation as a key part of our reforms. And through the sort of consultative process I mentioned earlier, we're really keen to get views from industry on the role that construction products can play within that, what government can do to help support net zero, what industry can do, and we kind of take that forward in partnership. Thanks, Ian.
Excellent. Yes, I think you're right, David, and that probably leads us into the second question when we talk about what is the future of testing following the forthcoming phase 2 of the Grenfell inquiry report. I don't know if there's anything you'd be able to respond with on that one.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think really just to say, as I touched on the start, the events at Grenfell and the subsequent unearthing of various issues and things that have taken place has been the principal driver for our programme of work. And we're looking at sort of wide-scale reform across the full system in terms of sort of research and development, testing of products, putting products on the market, and obviously making sure there's appropriate sort of enforcement and oversight of the market as well. And so the testing regime is a key part of that. It's probably not a huge amount more I can say at this stage, but we will set out our plans on that as part of our overall reforms, which will set out hopefully in the not too distant future. But yes, in doing that, we've certainly been paying very close attention to the information that's come from the Grenfell inquiry hearings and the like, and also the interim report.
Great, thank you. So some more that have come in that sort of expand. An interesting one from Matt Crunden, where it says about the official definition of a construction product, and unsurprisingly, we find this in the standards world with terms and definitions in all of our standards that tend to try and tackle this problem of consistency with definitions. But in terms of the official definition of a construction product, it seems to be more than one, i.e. there is a CPR definition, but then CPA appear to use a different definition for the Code for Construction Product Information. They're similar definitions, but not the same. So depending on which you use, it can significantly widen the scope. And then Matt says about which one does the Building Safety Act refer to. I don't know what your response to that would be. Is there a sense from your perspective what definition of construction product you're working to and where that comes from?
Thank you. Very good question. So yeah, as you mentioned, Ian, there is so we are responsible for the legal framework, and there's a definition in the construction products regulation at the moment, which is focused on briefly products used in either buildings or civil engineering, and it's really focused on where the product, when the product is placed on the market, and the requirements that flow from that sort of pivot on that point around when the product is placed on the market. So we are looking at that definition as part of our reforms and thinking about whether that should be slightly broader. And in doing that, we are drawing on definitions used by others to kind of help inform our thinking. Ultimately, the CCPI and the CPA as a trade organisation are free to use whichever definitions they find most appropriate for their uses. We will set out our thinking on what we want to be within scope and out of scope of our reforms as part of our next phase of work. We recognise that having consistency is helpful, and so we are drawing from other definitions to kind of help us come up with the most suitable and robust definition for the legal framework.
Yes, I can imagine the challenge. As I say, if you talk, some of our committee members are undoubtedly on this webinar. I'm sure they would say the same thing. I certainly recall being at international technical committee meetings where days would be spent on terms and definitions alone. Is a bit of a minefield. So thank you for your answer. One here from Gavin who says, you may well have covered this as part of your presentation, but is the construction product legislation not yet in force or not being progressed as yet? Will products that currently have certification be required to undergo additional testing? And if that's something you can help with.
Thanks, Ian. Yes, really good question. So sort of two parts, if I just touch on the current requirements and the future. So yes, at the moment, what we have in place is a legal framework which is in effect largely a copy of the EU's construction products regulation with some amendments to enable it to sort of function effectively in the UK. So, for example, our Secretary of State now has a number of duties where the European Commission would have done that previously, and largely the two regimes remain the same. So that's the sort of current position. As part of our reforms, we are looking at what the future framework should look like, and that will include changes to legislation in terms of the domestic requirements here. The EU is also well down the path of reforming its regime as well. What I will say is that in terms of the end point of where we think we want to get to in terms of the legal framework, we completely recognise and get that transition from where we are now to where we want to get to is key, and we fully appreciate that this is not a quick, this isn't something that can be done quickly. The questions around how we transition are going to be a really key part of our work, and we'll be really keen to get views from industry as part of that as well, to understand potential sort of implications, what the dependencies are as well. Do we implement some of this in stages? Do we do everything in one go? What are the pros and cons? So we'd be really keen to draw on industry's sort of working knowledge of the regime as part of that. But yes, I do really want to emphasise that we do fully understand and appreciate that. How we move from where we are now to a future model is essential.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess to some extent that would apply to the sort of EU harmonised standards and designated standards as well. We know, for example, that our friends at OPSS, the Office for Product Safety and Standards, or Department for Business and Trade, we have conversations with them at the moment around the 446 designated standards that were transposed from the European harmonised standards list, and they remain the same. But obviously, that landscape will undoubtedly change in the future with new designation and de-designation, and we just need to probably think of that process and how the industry would adapt as we think about designated over or alongside EU harmonised standards. I guess that's the case as well, is it not?
Correct. Yeah, there's sort of two aspects almost really. There's in terms of any future regime, there's a question about what is the role of how do standards work within that, including in terms of European and wider international standards. And then in the shorter term, there's a question around what's our approach to new EU harmonised standards. And that's something we're thinking about, particularly as some of that is happening now, with the EU harmonising some standards for the first time.
Yes, absolutely. I think there's been a bit of a flurry of activity suddenly after inactivity. So yeah, you're absolutely right. I completely agree. And I guess almost getting to the last question, probably, David. But you talked about the national quality infrastructure, which is a really interesting one, and also the fact that even though we have the Department for Levelling Up and its sort of future response to the Paul Morrell report and its reform proposals, this goes across multiple departments that you've touched on already. This is likely to need that collaboration across the different regulators, the different government departments, and that national quality infrastructure is talking about that sort of holistic view of standards and accreditation, market surveillance, metrology, because you have NPL as part of that too. Do you see that playing a big part, and it's necessary for all of those entities to ensure that they are consistent and working together for this particular solution?
Thanks. Short answer is yes. Yeah, absolutely. There is a lot of links and relevance to a number of government departments, including the Department for Business and Trade, which has sort of oversight of those bodies that you mentioned as part of the national quality infrastructure, but also in terms of obviously trade, and as the new department for the what we call the New Approach Framework, which is all the products of CE, UKCA marked products. So yeah, DBT, to throw in an acronym, as the government always likes to have, is a key sort of partner on this, and we're working closely with DBT as part of our work. There's also relevance. There's a question asked, or we touched earlier, around sort of civil engineering, and that's very relevant to government, both in terms of as a purchaser and user of construction products in many of our infrastructure products, which we're a significant contributor to, but also that then links to a number of departments and agencies, for example, the Department for Transport and the National Highways Agency, for example, just as one. So there's a really kind of cross-cutting element to this, and so we are working closely across government as part of our thinking on the reforms.
Fantastic. And just to wrap up, we'll touch today on how people can sort of follow BSI and the standard side of this as we start to look at potentially revising construction product standards and even the system standards that exist, as well as that one of the questions touched on, it not just being product standards. But is there a way in which we can follow that progress? I don't want people to miss what's going on with DLUC and the reform. What would your advice be about sort of keeping track of all this and understanding as you do start to respond and people can give you their views? What would you say the best way to keep up with all of that, especially with, as you say, all those other government departments and what they're doing too?
Thank you. Yes, very good question. So we have several pages around construction products regulation on our website, gov.uk. And so we'll be updating that as necessary in due course. And I think our intention will be to have a sort of a banner there, so that when people do look on any of the pages relating to construction, it will direct them to our publication once it has been published. We, at the point of publication, we intend to do sort of work with a number of key organisations to help cascade that, including BSI, some of the main trade bodies such as the CPA and others, to really work as best we can to make everyone aware of our proposals document and to invite comments on that. And we're also, as I mentioned, intending to have some specific sort of roundtable and other engagement to help get into some of the detail of that. So yes, we'll look to kind of use a lot of the existing platforms in terms of trade organisations, but we'll also work closely very much with BSI, UCAS, etc., to make them aware of progress and to work with them to find the best ways to cascade this information. But yes, as I mentioned, the plan is we will publish a document setting out our thinking, and then that will be a sort of consultative process where we'll invite feedback from people on that, and then reflect on that and take forward the reforms. But yes, certainly Ian and BSI team will be making kind of work with you on that to help make sure that we are reaching as wide an audience as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That comms is critical, isn't it? That, as we said throughout this morning, there is a lot going on, and we need to provide as much help and visibility of that as we possibly can. David, we've hit 10:40, and that is the moment when we are going to have to draw this to a close. What we will do is share all of the questions that we've had asked with you, so you can see the type of thing we're being asked, and then we'll try and follow up with everybody afterwards to put some answers together with you in a bit more depth that we can't really go into with some of the more technical questions this morning. But thank you very much, David. Really appreciate your time. We'll let you go off to your next few thousand meetings that you've got today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much.
So that's coffee break. We'll just let you go and fill your tea and coffee up briefly and take a comfort break. We'll be back in, I guess, sort of 4 or 5 minutes with our facilities management. Thank you. Hello, welcome back. I hope you've all managed to top up your tea and coffee, delete all the emails that you've had in the last hour while David was presenting. We go now into the second half and a bit of a change of topic away from products and into the quality and management of the facilities and assets with the two presenters we have. Nick Blake, Associate Director of Gardner and Theobald, Chair of our Facilities Management Technical Committee, FMW1, and Stan Mitchell, CEO of Key Facilities Management and convener of ISO Technical Committee 267, Working Group 9. So we're now going to talk about the revision of ISO 41001. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Ian. We should now be seeing. We are awesome. With only one exception that I can think of, construction time costs, they're both dwarfed by the duration of and investment in a building's operational cycle. Indeed, I believe Stan will be sharing some of the actual figures on the cost side in our next presentation. FM holds a key and pivotal role in the current and future operations of buildings, and this year we really promoted this during our World FM Day with the scrolling tagline you should be seeing up on the screen. In English, that means making a real difference. My name is Nick Blake. As Ian said, I chair BSI's Technical Committee, FMW1. I also sit on the Strategic FM Committee, FMB1, and my day job is as Associate Director for Gardner and Theobald's Specialist Asset and Facilities Management Advisory Group, with a focus on procurement, operational advice to building owners, operators, and the construction industry, as well as business process improvement. My 15 minutes are going to fly by as I introduce what FM is, the importance of integrating the FM function into the construction phase, and what we are doing in the sphere of UK standards, and how all that leads into European standards. And for any FMs in the audience, or even those with an interest in the function, there may be some ways that you can get involved. I'm then going to pass on to Stan, who will round us out with an introduction to our global or ISO work, and close our presentation with an orientation to potentially the most influential FM standard we have, which is under review at this time. As a starter, we can use one of our definitions from a standard we are active in drafting, or rather were active in drafting. We'll soon be very supportive in publishing. BSE and ISO 41011 defines FM as an organizational function which integrates people, place, and process within the built environment with the purpose of improving the quality of life of people and the productivity of the core business. What does that actually look like? Many of you may have not seen what is now a 5.5-year out of date mind map. This is the latest version I had from the FM Guru team and have permission to use in presentations. And whilst I don't expect you to read that, what it does show is the complexity of what FMs cover. The blue area, particularly the upper left section, is the traditionally understood part of FM. It's a high-level overview of the service provision that FMs undertake. And on the right-hand side in green, compliance is possibly the better-known management area we have under the FM remit. The rest of that is often overlooked. I would, however, particularly with this audience, like to draw attention to the crucial involvement of FMs in the capital works project, sort of centre towards the bottom, the right bit. The red bit, sorry. Having been evangelizing soft landings for the last few years for the trade association that actually brought it to the fore, and currently commercially offering operational advisor consultancy as part of my day job, it was a huge pleasure to see the recent update of CIBSE's Guide M included operational advisors as a key component of that revision. Good operational advisors to the construction industry, particularly when they are involved early on in the design phase and retained throughout the construction, handover and into the operational phases, can do a lot to bridge the performance gap. That is, they're able to smooth the transition from the construction phase of a built assets life cycle to its operational phase. Where the FM team is known during the design and build phases, they may be, depending on their experiences, the best individuals for the role of operational advisor. Where there is no known FM, the guidance for or engagement of engagement of a third party to share their operational knowledge with the construction experts is highly advised to take steps to bridge that performance gap and smooth the transition. As a second ever chair of FMW1, I've got some pretty huge shoes to fill. Stan, who you'll be hearing from next, started the committee about 20 years ago in 2003. FMW1 represents the UK through BSI as the technical steering committee for FM standards. Its first activity was to represent the UK in the CEN initiative that ultimately created the BSEN 15221 series of standards, which are the precursors to what Stan is going to be talking about next. We are supported by industry experts from as individuals in individual capacity and nominated organizations. You can see a list of some of those nominated organizations on the side of this slide. You heard me mention a couple of alphanumeric designators, FMW1 and FMB1. The very approximate split between those groups is that the latter formed FMB1 is our guidance, support and source of direction, whereas the action happens in FMW1. On the action side, you can see here a list of the 17 published standards that FMW1 has solely or collaboratively compiled. These range from making the language used in FM globally accessible and understood, through creating a code of practice for FM suppliers to follow and clients to ask for, all the way to supporting or helping the construction industry with guidance on design, manufacture and construction of built assets for operability. The latter was put together collaboratively with other BSI committees and is one of the latest British standards we produced, being given the designation of BS 8536 2022. For any of our operationally focused audience, the code of practice I was mentioning was the penultimately published British standard and has been given the brilliant moniker of BS 8210, eliciting fond memories of that mini phone, finished phone. Both of those standards, BS 8210 and BS 8536, are standards that I am flagging up to this audience, bringing to your attention, as I feel in the light of our focus on quality and performance in the construction industry and the asset arenas, these are a pair of major players. But not a group to rest on our laurels. We are currently working on, according to the webpage, even more standards that we've previously published, but I can caveat that with a snippet of back of house knowledge and let you know that rather than the 18 it says on the website, it's closer to the 8 that we actually have up here. There's a number of duplications that we're still trying to clear out, but that is still a lot going on, and we'll come back to that thought in a few minutes. I've mentioned collaborations a few times. One of our major collaboration points is with our CEN friends. CEN, as you can see up on the screen, is the European conglomeration of national standards bodies from 34 geographically European countries. You can see those geographically European countries on the side there. The CEN Technical Committee 348 is the European group of experts that support the creation and revision of EN or European standards in the FM remit. So as you can see, there are 26 member countries part of that technical committee, UK being one of those. There are several touch points between our BSI team and the CEN team, and even more on the ISO side, which I'm going to leave for Stan to share with you. What I would like to finish with over the next 2 slides is the promised information of how you guys can get involved. The first 2 ways are displayed here, and these apply to every person in the audience. This is a 2 or 3 step process of registering through the BSI website to get an account, which is a free process. And then you search through the standards being reviewed for one you would like to comment on. The optional 3rd step is to make some comments. You can see on the slide the types of comments that can be made. They fall into the editorial, technical, and general categories. At this time, I don't believe there are any automated alerts for the standards that are coming up. However, there are alternatives for anyone interested in FM. I am and will be sharing on the next slide my LinkedIn handle. So if you would like to take a screen grab or snap a photo, if you send me a connection request, I will happily add you. I always shout out to my network about the relevant standards up for review. The last part of this slide is letting you know, and by you again, I'm widening this up to the whole audience, it's letting you know that you are able to forward proposals for standards on pretty much any topic. The classic example is that there is a standard for making tea. This started as a British standard and is now an ISO international standard. My last slide shows some of our active works, and this is a nice little lead on. Before I pass over to Stan to take us through our work with ISO, I would like to segue there with a reminder, a reiteration that we are looking for support in drafting. I showed you many active items that you can see in your own relaxed time on our FMW1 BSI website, or by playing back this webinar when it's posted. For example, one of our current work items that is in its absolute infancy is looking for active support. So BSEN ISO 41012 is being reviewed at the moment. And being that it is on the topics of service sourcing, procurement, and contract management, which is very literally my day job, I do feel even more kinship to this standard. So my closing comments would be to ask if any of you are also working in this area, or know people who are, or even know the broader FM sphere covered by our active standards, and you or they are able to read and write, but crucially have an interest in supporting the industry with best practice guidance, I would ask you to please contact me on any of the media I'm sharing on the screens here and register your interest. Thank you very much. Stan, I'm going to pass over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Nick, and good morning to everyone on this webinar. As it says there, I'm not going to talk too much about me, but Key Facilities Management is the company I work for, and we are the longest established FM company in the UK, so been around for a long time. I used to have a head of hair when I started. And in terms of standards, I am currently the convener of Working Group 9 within the ISO TC committee, of which I'm going to tell you a little bit about now. If I can get the system to work. Here we go. So the first thing following on from some of what Nick said is, why is facilities management important? We're the new kids on the block in terms of the disciplines within the built environment sector. But this is one of the reasons. These stats here are not from us. These were government stats some time ago, when the government started to think about how they funded their real estate and what was the real whole life cost of any real estate. This was what resulted, and I think most of us would recognise that as there is quite rightly a lot of focus and attention on design and construction to make sure that what is created is fit for purpose. But it only represents around 15% of that whole life cost. And so whilst we might be the new kids on the block, we have a lot to offer in terms of the responsibility that we have through that whole life. And it's one of the logical reasons that facilities management advisory content should be there from day one, because we can work along with construction product suppliers in terms of design to make sure that the products that are chosen are maintainable, that the design is efficient and effective, and how we can look after that 80% of that whole life cost. So I'm glad to say that more and more now we are sitting at that design table where we can provide our operational knowledge and experiences to try and support the design team in getting the sustainable and environmentally friendly real estate produced in an efficient and effective manner. So by way of a quick introduction to the committee itself, this is the structure that we have. And we have AG1, AG2 are advisory groups. The CAG is the chairman's advisory committee that's attended by all the conveners of all the working groups. And as you can see, the working groups themselves are the people who do the groundwork in terms of developing the content in all standards that come out of the ISO committee. And the BSI committee that Nick chairs is the committee that has the voice of the UK in all of these working groups. So as he said, if there's anyone in the audience listening to this that has a genuine interest in influencing some of these standards, do contact BSI so that you can participate in FMW1 and thereafter participate in these working groups at the international level. So as you can see there, we've published 7 international standards, and we have plenty more in process that are highlighted in the brown color there. Just briefly, these are the current conveners of all of those working groups. And as you can see, we do have good international representation. And there are currently, in ISO TC 267, there are currently 53 countries that are represented. So we do have a truly international perspective on everything that we do in terms of developing the facilities management standards. And that to me is very healthy, because although in the UK we for sure have our own perspective and agenda to follow in terms of complementing the market in the UK, it's very, very beneficial that we hear other opinions and other views. And we have some very good, robust, interesting dialogue that takes place in a lot of these working groups in order to try and create something that can be truly international and valuable to all of the markets that we serve. I'm going to show you 2 quick examples of outputs from 2 of those working groups before I jump into working group 9, which is the 41001 working group that I lead at the moment. This is an example of working group 6, where they are looking at the moment and just about to publish some standards on technology. Now, we all know technology is influencing everything that we do, no matter what sector we're talking about. And I thought they went about this in an interesting manner, that when they started to talk about technology and how it can influence facilities management, it became a much broader perspective that was input to this working group dialogue than most of us anticipated at the beginning. And so they tried to capture the different facets, if you like, of technology and how it can be applied in a facilities management context in any organization, irrespective of the type or where it might be. So it's a little bit of an example of some of the work, the output work that comes from some of these working groups. Another one that I do want to touch on, particularly as we're all watching and listening to what's going on in COP28 at the moment in UAE, is that every standard that comes out of ISO has to declare where it aligns with the UN SDGs. And you can see there, the boxes at the bottom are the different SDGs that the UN has published. And the numbers that are shown in graphical format shows you the number of committees within ISO that contribute towards that particular UN SDG. Interestingly, from a facilities management perspective, our 41,000 series of standards is second only to one other ISO committee in the potential influences that we have on those UN SDGs. So we, as an international committee across all of the standards that we create, have the ability and have already influenced 14 of the 17 SDGs in place. We've published, or just about to publish, I think it might get published this year, but perhaps into January, February, the latest technical report. So the technical report is slightly different than a standard in that it's something that we can produce a bit quicker than the typical timeline of a standard. And 41009 is all about the role of FM in sustainability and resilience. So watch out for that one. And if this topic is something that's of interest to you, which I hope is of interest to most of us on the call, this might be something that gives you the FM context about how we in facilities management can influence the contribution towards the sustainable. In terms of 41001, that's the official document that was published back in 2018. And this is a management system standard. And I'm going to just explain what that is specifically. And it also includes requirements with guidance for use. So when I talk about a management system standard, as it says there, it's applicable to any organization of any type. And that's the kind of key message. ISO, BSI manage management system standards very carefully to make sure that they are generic enough and applicable to any sector in order to make sure it has the ability to achieve the objectives that are stated within it. I like to describe it as a management system standard could be considered as a horizontal standard, whereas it's different from specific technical standards, which would be about specific activities like maintenance or security, etc. within the FM context. And that's all they focus on. They focus on the one topic. A management system standard, as the name implies, is about the management of that activity. And the benefits of an effective management system to any organisation, irrespective of what you're directly involved in, is and does deliver more efficient use of the resources available. It improves financial performance. It improves risk, which is associated with all that we do, again, irrespective of the context. And it enables increased capability to deliver consistent and improved services and products. And that then delivers on a greater value to the customers and all other stakeholders, which is something that within the facilities management context, our stakeholders are many and varied, and all the stakeholder groups that we potentially interface with all are looking for something slightly different from an FM regime. So moving on to the ISO 41001 process, and this is the graphic that I'm going to slowly expose to you that is within the standard itself. There are two parties to it. The demand organization is what we call the client organization, and we use that term because in the Far East, client doesn't translate very well in terms of their language. So again, we're an international committee, and it's important that all that we do is applicable internationally. It starts to look at the context of the core business that you're serving, which drives the FM strategy and the FM policy. And that comes under leadership and then planning. From our point of view as facilities management people, to create our facilities management plans as to how we're going to deliver the value to the organization. In attempting to do that, we don't do it on ourselves. If we are True FM is a management regime, so we need the support internally, externally, with supply chain colleagues that have the technical competencies, and that enables us then to go and deliver the operational requirements that the demand organization needs in support of its core business. The standard then goes on to talk about how performance can be measured. And as the man said, if you cannot measure it, you cannot improve it. So the objective of measurement is to improve. And when we find those opportunities, we then might need to revisit the cycle again and look at policies, the plans, etc., in order to keep focus on that continuous improvement cycle. And within ISO and BSI, though these standards tend to follow the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. So that's the graphic that's in the standard itself. I kind of like this graphic around the MSS has a high level structure that's common across all management system standards in ISO. And it talks about that demand organization and the strategic analysis of what is required. Several of the clauses within this standard, and my apologies, don't expect you to be able to read what they say, but they are all representing different clauses in the standard itself. And then we have a number of other clauses that are really looking at the tactical risk compliance activities and the operational controls. And the reason I like this, and I like how this is presented in 41001, is that it gives us direction in terms of that high level structure about what we should be doing in terms of a management regime, in this case focused on facilities management. And that direction tries to encourage the development of clarity so that the demand organization and the FM organization are totally aligned. And then the other clauses shown below on the slide, they are all about control. So once we understand what we're trying to do, in other words, the strategic level delivers, let's do the right things for the stakeholder groups, for the demand organisation, for the communities in which we operate. And then the control parts of the standard, they're all about doing those things right and doing them consistently and following that plan, do, check, act cycle for continuous improvement. Why do standards matter? I think there's a whole bunch of reasons why they matter. And I often ask audiences when I'm talking to them, or clients when we're supporting them, have they read any of these standards? Because what the standards are is a guidebook. Don't reinvent the wheel is what I keep telling people. We have input from 53 countries, FM experts from all of those countries. And the knowledge and expertise that we capture is there for everybody to use. And it can be incredibly effective when people use it. I'll finish off now with a slide that is some feedback about organizations that have implemented 41001. So these are not my words, these are the words that have come from those individuals. The individuals include government agencies, government departments, and they include corporate organizations where they've gone through the process, and as a company, Key gets involved in supporting organizations how to do that. And the result of their journey, because the real value in a management system standard is actually not the certificate on the wall, although that might be important for other reasons, but it's the journey of going down that route to achieve compliance with the standard, because 41000 is a certificated standard that people can get the external auditors to come in and review what you've done in order to be aligned with it, and get that independent acknowledgement that that FM regime is following an international standard. And 41001 was and is the only international standard for facilities management. So as you can see from some of those bullets, that's genuine feedback from genuine users who've followed that path. So thank you all very much for listening, and I know both Nick and I will be very pleased to answer any questions that anybody might have on the webinar. Thank you. Back to Ian.
Thank you, Stan. I mean, incredible presentations from you both. I've worked at BSI for over 20 years in standards development, and I've learned lots from both of your presentations. So kudos to you for the work you do. Thank you for being so involved for so long, and clearly very knowledgeable and very succinct in terms of the messaging that you have put across to the audience this morning. And we've only got a few minutes left, so perhaps as there's two of you, and you'll be both answering these questions. So, I mean, you've probably covered it to some extent, but there was a question about what has driven the revision of ISO 41001. Are there some key aspects that you could both give us? I mean, I know the sort of process of going through these revisions and 5-year reviews and all that, but you know, maybe you could both give us a bit more insight in what's driven this new revision, please.
Okay, perhaps I can start. There are two fundamental reasons for the review. One is the rules within ISO say every 5 years you've got to review a management system standard, and you either delete it because it's no longer relevant to the market that you're serving, or you go and edit it and look to improve it, or alternatively, if you think it's perfect, leave it alone. We were very much of the view that it needed editing. And one of the reasons that we believed it needed editing is one of the reasons that the UK itself is arguably one of the most mature markets in the FM world. And whilst we've had a very good uptake of this standard internationally, where other countries are looking to catch up and probably overtake where we are in the UK. That's where most of the use of the standard has been. And one of the reasons we wanted to do a review was very much to try and entice the UK market itself to sit up and take note of what we've got in here. So we want to improve it both in terms of the core content of the standard, because we believe we can embellish it a little bit but still remain within the confines of what's we're allowed to do from an editorial point of view. But we're also going to, in terms of the guidance, which is part of 41001, we now want to develop other, there's only one annex at the moment in the standard, and we want to develop annexes that are applicable to different sectors of the market. So you may have an annex about the healthcare sector or government department, or an annex about corporate office space or whatever it might be. So that's one of my objectives in terms of reaching out to the widest possible participation. And as Nick had said, FMW1 is the route to doing that, but we want specialists, we want people from the construction sector and the product side of that to come in, influence what we're going to do in the guidance in the body of the standard as well as the appendices.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Stan. And Nick, your thoughts, please?
Yeah, I would want to echo a lot of what Stan has said, but really the process for drafting a standard is a few years in the making. So yes, the 41001 is dated 2018, but a lot of what went in there probably comes from 2016, 2017. And as Stan was saying, we are recognized as, if not one of the most mature FM markets in the world, sharing what's been developed and the evolution that's happened, massive changes in the last few years alone. Getting that into the standard and making it, well, there is one standard above all others that everyone in the world seems to know, 9001. This is FM's version. So making it suitable for that that grand title, so that people will say, no, I don't have my 9001, or I've got that, but I also have my 41001. We're talking about the FM side of the industry here, making sure it is suitable for people to actually put their name behind in 2024, 5 when it comes out.
I was going to ask you that. That was another thing that on the timeline, you're obviously right that it takes time for these things. You talk about an international community of 140 countries in ISO, where, you know, translating it into their language and asking them to then give you comment on it is a long process, and lots of milestones of consultation throughout that process. So you're thinking 2026, is that the timeline you're on? I mean, no one's holding you to this, but just so the audience knows.
We're recording this, we can't say.
We've got a plan to 2025 to finish our work, but
Sure.
You then have quite a lengthy period beyond that before it actually gets published. So I suspect we won't see the new revision of this till 2026. So my message to everybody on this call is that gives us time to get all the input that we're looking for and to make sure that we truly represent FM in the UK and every other country that's involved.
Yeah, so my colleague, Dr. Anna Fricker, who manages these technical committees with you, has put in the chat about its scheduled publication in 2026. But I suppose, Stan, you know, sometimes we do find that, you know, especially if it's a contentious subject, that it does rumble on into a longer period than that. And I think it goes back to a lot of the content of your presentations about, I don't think it's always apparent how much work goes into these things and how many people are involved with them. And maybe just as a closing question, similar to what I asked David in his presentation, we're talking about an overriding duty of care for the people of the UK and the planet. I suppose maybe to some extent you would be looking to tackle that type of topic too, if we're talking, you know, the sustainability and the future of the planet and the people that live on it. Do either of you have thoughts on that?
Very much. If I go back to the slide that Nick presented, that was the definition of facilities management, there's only one thing in that definition that's mentioned twice, and that's people. And, you know, I showed you a slide that shows that the FM committee within ISO is second of all the ISO committees in its ability to touch and influence people, their well-being, their security, the planet, the stakeholders that I mentioned when I spoke. We have multiple stakeholder groups that we serve, and as per Nick's graph of what do FMs do, we get pulled in lots and lots of different directions, and it's for those reasons that we want that broad input to make sure that 41001 in 2026, if that's when it finally appears, is all embracing and is a real tool that the UK market can truly grasp and adopt. And obviously my interest right now is that I want them to influence it. So
I think so, yeah. There is that sort of sense that, you know, you have an international community of countries, and BSI in the UK is a member of that, and then you have your FMW committee that is your UK stakeholders. But actually, standards development is an open and transparent process. Everybody sees the draft long before it's published. I think you talked about the commenting bit, Nick. You know, maybe your closing remarks can be another plea perhaps for people to really get involved in this and see that sort of societal change that Stan was referring to, that you really need that input.
Absolutely. I want to reiterate the huge impact that FM has, or potential impact that FM has on so many subjects, particularly around the sustainability, our energy influences. All of this falls within an FM's remit. And yes, the way to making sure that we share our learnings, it's great that one person has a good idea, but if you are willing to share that, standardization is a way to do that. And absolutely, these slides do go up, or just searching through the BSI website for how do I contribute might bring up what you're looking for. That's the easy sort of hands-off, still behind a keyboard way of doing it, is to comment on existing standards or suggest new standards. A very involved, hands-on way of doing it is getting involved in the actual.
You're spot on, Nick. I also say thank you for doing my job for me with some of your presentation material, in that you champion the standards process very well. And actually, one thing I would add just about the standards development portal is that I think there is actually a way that you can put a flag next to a standard. So when it's in development, you will get a notification when it moves on a stage, or certainly when it publishes. So I think people, when they go in and look in the way that you described, there is a way to keep up with that. And then certainly technology on that site has advanced so much that you can submit your comments at the public commenting phase online, and you don't have to leave your home office in your garden or wherever you live these days. Gentlemen, I'm afraid we've run out of time for this morning. Again, we will share all the questions with you so you can take a look at what was asked of you. But just to thank you both again for an excellent presentation. I think the audience would have really learned a lot, and we're sort of, it's a call to action to get involved in this particular standard, which is amazing. And good luck with the revision of it. We'll check in with you again in the future, I'm sure. Just as a final wrap up on this morning's webinar, thank you so much for attending. I hope you got a lot from it, both David's construction products presentation and Nick and Stan's FM presentation. The Global Built Environment Conference continues into this afternoon with my colleague Anne Bird talking about health, safety and well-being. Building safety regulator and competency is all covered in that session. And you can see some of the January and February events that are coming along. There are also some, from built environment perspective, BSI is holding its review of 2023 at the end of January, and then into February we have more webinars related to competency and construction products in March. We look forward to seeing you then. Thank you once again, and Merry Christmas, everybody. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.